Some people don't fear being alone anymore. They fear being forgotten, and she was already there. Marissa Hale had learned how to move through the world without leaving a mark. She was not invisible in the literal sense. People could see her standing in line, walking down the street, sitting quietly in public spaces. But no one truly noticed her presence, and over time, that kind of absence settled deep inside her. She was a woman shaped by long years of emotional rejection, not through loud cruelty, but through quiet neglect. Being overlooked had become her normal, and normal had slowly stopped hurting. Her life had not fallen apart all at once. It faded in small ways that were easy for others to ignore. Friends stopped calling when she needed support. Relationships ended with polite distance instead of honesty. Workplaces valued her reliability but never her voice. Each moment taught her the same lesson. She was useful, but not chosen. Over time, Marissa stopped expecting warmth from people. Expectation only made disappointment sharper, and she had learned how to survive by lowering her hopes. Loneliness did not arrive as sadness for her anymore. It arrived as routine. She woke up alone, planned her days alone, and returned home alone. The feeling no longer shocked her system. It settled into her like background noise, always present, but no longer loud enough to fight. She told herself this was strength. She told herself that independence meant not needing to be seen. What she did not admit was that she had simply grown tired of wanting. That evening she prepared herself for the familiar walk home. It was not a long distance, but emotionally it felt endless. As she adjusted her bag on her shoulder, she already knew how the walk would feel. The streets would be full of movement but empty of connection. She would pass people without being acknowledged. No one would look back when she left. Accepting this ahead of time made it easier. When you expect nothing, nothing cannot hurt you. Marissa had learned to manage her emotions the same way she managed her steps, carefully and without pause. She did not rush, and she did not hesitate. She moved with quiet control, the kind that comes from practice, not confidence. Each step forward was an agreement with herself that this was enough. She was not walking toward joy or comfort. She was simply walking away from a place where she had not belonged. What hurt most was not that she was alone, but that she believed her absence would change nothing. If she vanished from a room, the space would close behind her as if she had never been there. That belief had settled into her identity. She did not see herself as someone whose presence mattered. She saw herself as someone who passed through moments without leaving weight behind. This mindset had protected her for years. Emotional survival had become her skill. She knew how to keep her feelings contained, how to avoid attachment, how to leave before being left. Hope, to her, felt dangerous. Hope created expectations, and expectations invited disappointment. So she lived without it, telling herself that peace was better than longing. As she began her walk, Marissa did not look back. She never did. Looking back suggested there was something worth returning to, and she had trained herself not to believe that. Her shoulders stayed steady, her expression calm, and her thoughts quiet. This was not sadness in motion. This was acceptance. She believed no one would notice the moment she stepped away, not because people were unkind, but because they were occupied with their own lives. She understood that logic well. Everyone carried their own weight. There was no reason for anyone to stop for her. She had made peace with that truth long ago. Yet beneath that calm acceptance lived a truth she rarely acknowledged. Being strong had cost her something. It had cost her the belief that she could be chosen without proving her worth first. It had cost her the softness she once had. She did not miss that softness anymore, but it had left a quiet emptiness behind. As she continued forward, the world remained unchanged. Cars passed, lights shifted, life went on. Everything confirmed what she already believed, that her presence did not interrupt the flow of anything. She was just another person moving through space, unclaimed and unnoticed. Marissa reached the point where she fully expected the rest of the night to unfold exactly as planned. She would walk home. She would unlock her door. She would exist quietly. No interruptions, no surprises, no reminders that she still wanted something more than survival. Just as she steps forward believing no one will stop her, something unseen begins to shift behind her. When people leave, some men break. Others stay and carry everything alone. Ethan Cole never planned to become the kind of man who measured his life in quiet sacrifices. He had imagined a future once, one that included shared responsibilities and balanced dreams. But when life pulled away what he depended on, he did not Allow it into absence. He stayed. Staying was not heroic to him. It was simply what had to be done. 2 young lives depended on his presence, and that truth reshaped everything he became. After becoming a parent alone, Ethan learned that time no longer belonged to him. His days revolved around routines that left little space for personal desire. Mornings began early, nights ended late, and every decision passed through the same question: would this keep his children safe and steady? He did not resent this weight, but he felt it constantly. It pressed against his chest in moments of silence, reminding him that there was no one else to carry it with him. Raising children without support taught him discipline, but it also taught him restraint. He learned how to hide exhaustion behind consistency. He learned how to speak gently even when his own emotions were loud inside. The emotional labor of parenting alone was heavier than the physical tasks. There was no space to fall apart. If he broke, there was no one waiting to step in. So he built himself into something solid, even when that solidity felt lonely. Responsibility slowly replaced the dreams he once held. Career ambitions softened into stability goals. Personal freedom narrowed into careful planning. He did not mourn these changes openly. He accepted them as the cost of staying. But acceptance did not mean the absence of loss. There were nights when he sat awake, aware that parts of himself had gone quiet. Not gone completely, just quiet enough to survive without being acknowledged. Society rarely noticed the emotional weight he carried. Single fathers were often praised for effort but rarely asked about endurance. People assumed strength where there was simply necessity. Ethan felt that silence deeply. There were no spaces designed for him to admit fatigue or fear. He learned to keep those feelings private, tucked away behind practical routines and steady behavior. His strength was quiet, built from repetition rather than recognition. He did not see himself as remarkable. He saw himself as responsible. That distinction mattered to him. Responsibility did not require applause. It required presence. So he showed up every day, even when showing up felt like walking uphill with no view ahead. Despite being surrounded by his children, Ethan's emotional world remained narrow. He poured everything into them, leaving little for himself. Isolation crept in not because he lacked love, but because he had no place to set down his own needs. He had learned to function without emotional support, but functioning was not the same as healing. Loneliness for Ethan did not look like emptiness. It looked like fullness without relief. His life was crowded with care, schedules, and concern, yet there was no one who carried him the way he carried others. That imbalance shaped him quietly, making him cautious and contained. Unknowingly, his loneliness mirrored Marissa's in a different form. Where she felt invisible, he felt unseen. Where she expected abandonment, he expected endurance without acknowledgement. Their emotional paths had been shaped by different losses, but the result was similar. Both had learned to survive by minimizing their needs. At this point in his life, Ethan did not imagine connection. He did not believe there was room for it. His focus remained forward, on keeping things steady and pretty. Stable. Risk felt irresponsible. Vulnerability felt like a luxury he could not afford. He told himself that this was enough, that stability mattered more than closeness, yet beneath that careful structure lived a truth he rarely faced. Staying had made him strong, but it had also made him closed. He had mastered survival, but not openness. He had learned how to remain, but not how to invite someone else into the space he protected so carefully. As he moved through his days, he did not realize that his life was approaching a moment that would test more than his endurance. It would test his ability to open a door he had kept shut for years. Not through effort, not through planning, but through something unplanned and gentle. Though he learned how to survive alone, he never learned how to let someone close again. Children see emotional truth before adults admit it. Ethan's daughters, Lily and Harper, moved through the world with a kind of awareness that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with attention. They were young, but life had already taught them how to watch quietly. Growing up with a single parent had shaped them in ways even Ethan did not fully understand. They had learned to read rooms, moods, and silences the way other children learned games. Emotional awareness was not something they practiced. It was something they lived. Lily, the older of the two, had developed a steady sensitivity. She noticed when her father's shoulders dropped after long days. She noticed when his voice softened because he was tired, not calm. Harper, younger but equally observant, carried a gentler curiosity. She watched faces the way others watched stories, sensing shifts that were never spoken. Together, they formed an emotional balance that allowed them to understand more than adults expected. Children like them did not need explanations to recognize sadness. They felt it in pauses, in the way people stood, in the quiet space around someone who felt alone. They did not ask why someone looked tired or distant. They accepted what they sensed as truth. Adults often explained away emotions. Children accepted them. Kindness came naturally to Lily and Harper, not because they were taught to be kind, but because they felt connected to emotional absence. They knew what it meant to miss something without knowing how to name it. Their own lives had been full of love, but they had also seen strain, exhaustion, and quiet loneliness in their father. That exposure had sharpened their emotional instincts. Adults around them often missed what the girls noticed instantly. Grown-ups were busy, distracted, or guarded. They focused on schedules, rules, and responsibilities. They trained themselves not to see what felt inconvenient. Children did not have that training. They saw what was there. Emotional clarity was not something they avoided. It was something they trusted. When Marissa entered their awareness, it was not because she did anything noticeable. She did not speak loudly or draw attention. She simply existed in a way that felt familiar to them. Her presence carried a quiet weight, the kind that children recognized because it mirrored emotions they had already seen at home. She moved carefully, as if expecting to be overlooked. That expectation was something Lily and Harper understood deeply. The girls sensed her loneliness before they could explain it. It was not sadness in a dramatic sense. It was an absence of expectation, a calm that felt heavy. Marissa did not look around for connection. She looked forward, prepared to move on. To the children, that readiness to leave without being noticed felt wrong in a way they could not describe. While adults might have dismissed her as just another person passing by, the girls felt a pull toward her. It was not curiosity, it was recognition. They sensed that she belonged to the same emotional space they knew well, a space shaped by endurance rather than hope. They did not see her as distant. They saw her as quiet. Children often act as emotional gatekeepers because they have not yet learned to ignore what feels true. Lily and Harper had not learned how to look away from loneliness. They had not learned to rationalize it or label it as none of their concern. Their instinct was to respond, even if they did not know how. Ethan did not immediately notice this shift. Like most adults, his focus stayed on structure and routine. He trusted his daughters, but he did not realize how deeply they observed the world around them. He did not see the way their attention lingered, the way their energy changed when Marissa passed through their awareness. That emotional exchange happened quietly, without words. The girls did not see Marissa as an adult stranger. They saw her as someone who felt the way their father sometimes felt when he thought they were not looking. That familiarity created a bridge that no adult logic could have built. In that moment, the girls became something more than children. They became connectors. Their emotional clarity began forming a path between two adults who did not yet know they shared the same kind of loneliness. Lily and Harper did not plan this. They were not trying to fix anything. They were simply responding to what felt real to them. That response carried a power they did not understand. Children often lead without knowing they are leading. They move from instinct rather than intention. In doing so, they open doors adults have closed for safety. Lily and Harper were standing at one of those doors now, sensing that someone was about to leave a space that should not be empty. They did not know what would happen next. They did not understand consequences or outcomes. They only knew that something inside them said to act. That feeling grew stronger with every passing second, pulling them forward in a way that felt urgent but gentle. Without understanding why, the girls feel pulled to act, and that moment is coming fast. Kindness doesn't ask who you are, it just stops you. Marissa was already moving forward when it happened. Her body followed the habit she had built over years of leaving places quietly, without expecting resistance. Her mind was focused on the familiar rhythm of going home alone, on returning to the space where no one needed anything from her, and no one noticed her absence. She believed the moment had already passed. In her understanding of the world, once you decided to leave, nothing reached back for you. Then something interrupted that certainty. The sound that pulled her back was not loud or demanding. It carried no authority and no expectation. It was light, unguarded and completely unplanned. That was what made it powerful. Marissa stopped not because she was told to, but because something in that moment felt different from everything she was used to. She paused before she fully understood why. Being noticed hit her harder than rejection ever had. Rejection had been familiar, almost predictable. This was not. This was sudden awareness, a feeling she had not prepared herself for. Her first reaction was confusion. She did not immediately turn around. She stood still, as if her body needed time to confirm that the moment was real. When she finally looked back, she did not see judgment or expectation. What she felt instead was innocence, unfiltered and sincere. The children were not reaching out because they needed something from her. They were not curious about her status, her story, or her worth. They had acted because something inside them said she mattered enough to stop. That realization unsettled her more than indifference ever had. Kindness disrupted her emotional expectations in a way she was not ready for. She had learned how to handle being ignored. She had learned how to manage disappointment. But this was different. This was warmth offered without request, attention given without evaluation. It challenged the rules she had lived by for years. Marissa felt caught between two instincts. One told her to protect herself, to keep moving, to avoid the risk of hoping for something that might not last. The other urged her to stay just long enough to understand why she had been seen. That conflict created a tension inside her that she could not easily resolve. The children's action carried no strategy. It was not designed to change anything. That was the most powerful part. Their kindness came without expectation, without condition. It was not transactional. It did not ask her to prove herself or explain her presence. It simply acknowledged her existence. For the first time in a long while, Marissa felt something crack inside her emotional armor. It was not a break. It was a small fracture, barely visible, but enough to let something through. She felt warmth, unfamiliar and fragile, brushing against the parts of her she had kept closed. That warmth scared her more than cold isolation ever had. She wondered what it meant to be called back. Not physically, but emotionally. To be invited to pause when she had already accepted leaving. That invitation challenged her belief that her presence was unnecessary. It suggested, however briefly, that her absence might actually be felt. This moment was small by any outside measure. There was no dramatic gesture, no grand declaration. Yet for Marissa, it carried the weight of something enormous. It interrupted a pattern she had followed for years. It questioned a story she had told herself about her place in the world. She did not suddenly feel hopeful. Hope did not rush in and fix anything. What she felt instead was awareness. Awareness that kindness could arrive without warning. Awareness that being chosen did not always look the way she imagined. Awareness that maybe her understanding of herself had been shaped too much by silence. The children did not realize what they had done. They did not understand that their simple action had reached into a deeply guarded place. They were not aware that they had challenged a woman's long-held belief about her own invisibility. They acted from instinct, not intention, and that made their kindness pure. Marissa's fear did not disappear. It lingered, reminding her of every time she had trusted something that faded. But alongside that fear grew a quiet warmth that refused to be ignored. It did not promise safety. It only offered presence, and that presence felt unfamiliar enough to demand attention. She remained still, suspended between leaving and staying. The world around her continued as usual, unaware that something subtle but significant was happening. For everyone else, time moved forward without pause. For Marissa, time held its breath. This was the moment where isolation first lost its certainty, not because it was defeated, but because it was questioned. The interruption did not solve her loneliness, it revealed it, and in revealing it, something began to shift. That simple interruption begins changing more than just her direction. It begins changing lives. Being alone hurts, but being chosen after loneliness hurts even more. Being acknowledged did not bring Marissa relief the way people imagine it does. Instead, it unsettled her. The moment kindness touched her life, emotions she had buried began to surface, heavy and unorganized. She had lived so long without being noticed that attention now felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous. Her mind searched for reasons to pull away, to explain the moment as temporary or accidental, something she should not rely on. Trust did not come easily to her. Kindness, especially unexpected kindness, felt like a risk she was not sure she could afford. Part of her wanted to accept the warmth she felt growing inside, but another part reminded her of all the times warmth had faded without warning. She had survived by expecting absence, not presence. Letting herself believe this moment meant something required courage she had not practiced in years. As she remained where she was, Ethan slowly became aware of her in a way he had not been before. It was not attraction or intention that drew his attention, but recognition. He noticed the way she held herself, the careful distance she maintained from expectation. He recognized that posture because he carried it himself. Without words or gestures, he sensed something familiar in her restraint. Their connection did not form through conversation or shared stories. It formed through silence. There was a shared understanding that neither of them needed to explain. Both had learned to function without being asked how they were doing. That mutual quiet created a space that felt honest, even if it felt fragile. Loneliness does not disappear when connection begins. It reacts, it resists. For Marissa, loneliness tightened its grip as soon as it felt threatened. Her instincts warned her to protect herself, to step back before attachment could grow roots. Being seen meant being vulnerable, and vulnerability reminded her of loss. Ethan felt his own tension rising. He was not used to noticing adults in this way. His emotional energy had been reserved for his children for so long that the presence of someone who mirrored his own guardedness unsettled him. He did not feel drawn forward, but he did not pull away either. He stood in that uncomfortable space between awareness and avoidance. There was no romance in the moment, no rush of emotion meant to promise something more. What existed instead was emotional tension built from recognition. They were two people standing close to something meaningful without knowing how to reach for it. Fear and hope balanced uneasily between them. Marissa questioned herself. Why did being noticed feel heavier than being ignored? She realized it was because being seen created responsibility. If someone acknowledged her, she had to decide whether to stay present or retreat. Leaving had always been easy. Staying asked something from her she was not sure she could give. Ethan felt a similar pull. He sensed that this moment could open something he had kept closed for years. His life had been built on control and predictability. Emotional uncertainty felt like a threat to the stability he had worked so hard to maintain. Yet ignoring it felt dishonest. The children remained quietly present, unaware of the emotional complexity unfolding around them. Their earlier instinct had created a pause in time, and now that pause held weight. Neither adult wanted to break it, but neither knew how to move forward. Marissa's fear was not loud. It was careful and calculated. It reminded her that connection could end as suddenly as it began. Ethan's fear was steadier, shaped by responsibility. He wondered whether opening himself emotionally could disrupt the balance he had created for his children. Both fears were valid. Both stood in the way of something meaningful. The air between them held possibility but also risk. Being chosen, even briefly, made Marissa question the story she had told herself about her place in the world. Being seen reminded Ethan that survival alone was not the same as living fully. Neither of them spoke, yet both felt the shift happening. They were standing at the edge of something fragile. Hope had not taken control, but it had entered the space quietly. Fear had not disappeared, but it had been challenged. That balance created tension that neither of them could ignore. This moment did not promise resolution. It promised choice. Both Marissa and Ethan understood that whatever came next would require staying present, not retreating into old habits. The weight of that understanding settled between them, heavy but real. Connection feels real now, and real things can be lost. Some families are built by need, not blood. What began as a pause slowly turned into presence. No one named it at first, but something had shifted after that interrupted moment. Marissa did not return to her old rhythm of leaving quietly. She stayed longer than she normally would, not out of obligation, but because leaving no longer felt automatic. Staying still felt unfamiliar, yet it no longer felt unsafe. The bond did not form all at once. It grew in small, unremarkable ways that carried unexpected weight. Time spent in shared spaces began to feel lighter. Silence no longer felt heavy or awkward. The children moved freely, their comfort acting as an unspoken permission for everyone else to relax. Their ease created a sense of safety that neither adult had realized they were missing. Lily and Harper became the emotional center without trying to be. Their presence softened edges and lowered defenses. They did not demand connection, they assumed it. That assumption made all the difference. Where adults often hesitated, the children simply existed honestly. Their trust made it easier for Marissa to remain present without questioning her place. Their consistency gave Ethan reassurance that stability did not have to mean isolation. Home began to change its meaning. For Marissa, home had always been a place of quiet survival, not belonging. It was where she recovered from the day, not where she felt held. Now, the idea of home started to stretch beyond walls. It became connected to shared moments, to being expected rather than tolerated. That shift was subtle, but powerful. For Ethan, home had been responsibility, focused for so long that he forgot it could also be restorative. He had built his life around structure, ensuring that everything worked even if it did not always feel warm. As Marissa became more present, he noticed a balance forming. Emotional weight that he had carried alone felt lighter, not because it disappeared, but because it was no longer isolated. Healing did not come through dramatic change, it came through repetition. Shared routines began to form naturally. Familiarity grew without pressure. There were no promises made and no expectations spoken. The lack of urgency allowed trust to grow at its own pace. Each consistent moment added a layer of stability neither adult had anticipated. Marissa found herself thinking beyond survival for the first time in years. Her days no longer ended with emotional exhaustion. She began to imagine purpose not as endurance but as presence. Being needed did not feel overwhelming, it felt grounding. She was not filling a gap out of obligation. She was choosing to stay because staying felt meaningful. Ethan noticed a shift within himself as well. Emotional balance replaced constant alertness. He did not feel less responsible, but he felt less alone in that responsibility. Sharing emotional space did not weaken his role as a parent. It strengthened it. His children seemed more secure, more at ease, and that reassurance allowed him to soften in ways he had long avoided. This family was not planned. It was not defined by shared history or obligation. It formed because loneliness recognized loneliness, and neither turned away. The absence of pressure allowed authenticity to take root. No one was trying to replace anyone else. They were simply filling space that had been empty for too long. Chosen family does not announce itself. It reveals itself slowly through trust, consistency, and shared emotional safety. This was not a story of rescue. No one saved anyone else. What happened instead was mutual support, built through staying when it would have been easier to leave. The children anchored this bond in ways the adults could not have managed alone. Their emotional openness set the tone. Their sense of security reminded both Marissa and Ethan that connection did not have to be earned through struggle. Sometimes it was offered simply because it was needed. For a while everything felt steady. The fear that once dominated Marissa's decisions softened. Ethan's guardedness eased. Life did not become perfect, but it became balanced. There was room for mistakes, space for growth, and acceptance without condition. Yet stability has a way of waking old fears. Just when comfort begins to feel real, past wounds remember their shape. Marissa began to notice the familiar tension returning quietly, not loudly enough to disrupt the moment, but present enough to be felt. Ethan sensed it too, a subtle shift that reminded him how easily things could change. This family had formed without effort, but maintaining it would require courage. Staying would soon ask more of them than comfort ever had. The sense of belonging they were building carried risk, and both adults felt that weight settling in. Just when stability feels safe, old fears return quietly. The hardest part of healing is staying. The fear did not arrive suddenly. It returned the way it always had for Marissa, quietly and without warning. It surfaced in moments that were otherwise calm, in the spaces where she finally felt safe enough to breathe. That safety triggered memories she had spent years burying. Past experiences of being abandoned, overlooked, and emotionally dismissed began to rise again, reminding her that comfort had never lasted before. She started to question everything she felt. The warmth she had grown used to now felt fragile. Her mind searched for signs that this stability would fade the way others had. She remembered how hope once made her careless, how trusting the wrong moment had cost her deeply. Those memories whispered the same message they always had. Leave before you are left. The urge to pull away grew stronger with each passing day. Marissa recognized this pattern. It was the instinct that had protected her for years. When something began to matter, she stepped back. When connection felt real, she prepared her exit. Leaving had always been her way of staying in control. Staying meant risk, and risk meant pain she was not sure she could survive again. Ethan sensed the change before it was visible. He noticed subtle shifts in her presence, the way her energy seemed guarded again. He recognized that distance because he had lived inside it for a long time. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to assume it would pass on its own, but another part understood that silence could undo what consistency had built. Facing this moment forced Ethan into emotional risk he had long avoided. Al, lowering himself to care, had already stretched him beyond his comfort zone. Now he had to decide whether to step forward or retreat into the safety of emotional distance. He knew that choosing avoidance would protect him from disappointment, but it would also confirm his deepest fear. That connection never lasted. The children noticed the shift immediately. Lily became quieter, her attention more focused. Harper lingered closer than usual, sensing the tension she could not name. They did not understand what was changing, but they felt it. Children always did. Emotional distance unsettled them because they had learned to trust emotional consistency. Their reactions affected both adults deeply. For Marissa, it intensified her guilt. She worried that her fear would disrupt the stability the children had grown comfortable with. For Ethan, it heightened his concern. His children's emotional security had always been his priority, and the thought of anything threatening that balance made him cautious. The tension grew heavier, filling the space with unspoken questions. Nothing dramatic happened, no arguments, no sudden breaks. The struggle unfolded internally, shaped by memory and fear rather than conflict. Both adults stood at the edge of a decision that felt far larger than the moment itself. Marissa reached the point where leaving felt easier than staying. She told herself she was protecting everyone involved. If she left now, the pain would be smaller, more manageable. She convinced herself that absence would hurt less than loss. That logic had guided her before, and it had always felt reasonable in the moment. Ethan faced a similar internal battle. He wondered if opening himself emotionally had been a mistake. He questioned whether stability required emotional distance. Staying present felt vulnerable, and vulnerability felt like inviting disruption into a life he had worked hard to stabilize. The choice between protection and love stood clearly before them. Protection meant retreat, returning to familiar patterns that guaranteed survival but not growth. Love meant staying, accepting uncertainty, and risking disappointment. Neither option felt safe. Both demanded courage. The moment that defined everything arrived quietly. It was not marked by words or gestures. It was defined by whether they would remain present despite fear, whether they would trust the consistency they had built or retreat into old habits that promised control but delivered loneliness. Marissa stood at the threshold of leaving once again, aware that doing so would confirm the story she had always believed about herself. Ethan stood at his own threshold, knowing that avoidance would protect him but cost him something meaningful. The children waited unknowingly, their sense of security resting on a decision they could not influence. This was the point where healing could either deepen or dissolve. Staying required more strength than leaving ever had. It demanded trust in something unproven, and faith in consistency rather than certainty. Both adults felt the weight of that choice pressing down on them. Time did not rush them. The moment stretched, allowing fear and hope to coexist. What came next would not just shape their connection. It would determine whether this fragile family could endure the test that every bond eventually faces. One decision will decide whether this family survives. Love is proven by staying when it would be easier to leave. The truth of that sentence settled quietly into the small apartment, not as a grand declaration but as a steady presence that refused to disappear. Mornings no longer felt like something to survive. They became something to share. The father noticed it first in the way silence had softened, how it no longer pressed against his chest, but rested beside him like a patient companion. Nothing dramatic had changed, yet everything had. She chose presence without announcing it. There was no speech, no promise shaped by fear of losing him. She stayed in the ordinary moments, in the unspectacular hours that usually push people away. When doubt surfaced, she did not retreat. When uncertainty lingered, she did not demand reassurance. Her staying was not loud. It was consistent, and that consistency carried a strength he had never known how to ask for. The children sensed it before anyone explained it. Their instincts, sharpened by years of emotional caution, relaxed inch by inch. They watched how she returned each evening, how her voice remained gentle even when tired, how she listened more than she spoke. Slowly, they stopped guarding their hearts at the doorway. Bedtime laughter came easier. Questions grew braver. Security arrived not through words but through repeated proof that tomorrow would still include her. For the woman, staying rewrote something deep inside. She had once believed love required constant performance, that being chosen meant proving worth again and again. Here, she learned a different truth. She was not asked to compete with ghosts or measure herself against absence. She was simply welcomed. In offering steady care, she discovered a version of herself that was calmer, braver, and rooted in patience rather than fear. The father struggled with acceptance in quiet ways. Independence had been his armor, built through years of doing everything alone. Sharing a life felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous. Yet each day she stayed, his resistance softened. He learned to set down burdens he had carried without question. Letting someone help did not weaken him. It expanded the space where hope could live. Healing came through ordinary love. Shared meals that did not feel rushed. Conversations that wandered without needing resolution. Small disagreements that ended without abandonment. The magic was not in grand gestures, but in the steady rhythm of togetherness. Even pain, when it surfaced, felt safer when met with understanding rather than escape. Love became a place where wounds could rest instead of hide. Hope replaced isolation quietly, like light filling a room one corner at a time. The apartment felt warmer, not because of decoration, but because belonging had taken root. The father noticed how he no longer braced himself for loss. The woman realized she no longer waited for permission to care. The children stopped asking who would leave next. The future no longer felt like a question mark shaped by fear. There were moments when the past tried to reclaim its voice. Doubt whispered that good things rarely last, that love often comes with an expiration date. But staying answered those doubts more effectively than reassurance ever could. Each shared day rewrote old expectations. Each morning that began together strengthened the quiet belief that some people do not disappear when things become real. What bound them was not obligation, but choice. A family formed not by blood, but by repeated decisions to remain. The woman did not stay because she had to. The father did not open his life because he was pressured. The children did not trust because they were told to. They all chose again and again to believe in something steady, something earned through time. In choosing one another, they discovered a gentler version of love, one that did not demand perfection or constant gratitude, one that allowed space for growth without fear of abandonment. The past had taught them to survive. This love taught them how to live. It did not erase loneliness, but it replaced it with companionship that felt real and sustainable. As days turned into memories, none of them noticed the exact moment when staying became belonging. It happened somewhere between shared laughter and quiet evenings, between trust given and trust returned. The story they were living no longer revolved around loss, but around presence. And presence, they learned, was the rarest kind of love. Their story ends, but countless others are just beginning. If this story stayed with you longer than you expected, don't let it end here. Someone else might need this reminder of what quiet kindness can change. Stay connected for more stories like this, because presence once felt is hard to forget. So tell me, if you were in her place, would you have walked away or chosen to stay?